that the namesake isn't on for your first week. But welcome. Hey, the point of this is we want to share some announcements, and we want to just talk a little bit about the teaching text this week, the themes, the implications, some of the things we're wrestling with around that, and then hand it off to you to discuss and to hash out, what the text means for our lives and how we process it together in community. So that's the heart. We're going to start with a couple announcements. The first is we started a new Alpha last week, and it's definitely not too late to join Alpha this Thursday night at 7. And so, Sarah, why don't you tell everybody a bit about what Alpha is? Some people might not know.
Totally. Alpha is a video series followed by a discussion. You just get together and chat about faith and questions you may have about Christianity. Maybe you find yourself part of a small group, but you still have more questions and feel like you benefit from a space where you could discuss more kind of fundamental things of faith, and this could be a great place for you. Or maybe you have a friend that you feel like would, benefit from chatting about those things, and that's a great environment for it.
That was so good. That was a very clear announcement. And we love Alpha as a church. We're committed to just keep doing Alpha at different points in the year. And one thing we see is that people often come on Alpha, experience community, and then want to bring their friends. And so we want to have another Alpha that's happening after that Alpha. So there's space for that. And so anyway, we love it. So we just started another one. And then the other announcement is that this Wednesday night. So for some of you, it's tomorrow night. Some of you, it's 2 nights. If you're in
Some of you, it's 3 nights. Just shout out to the Wednesday night small group people.
Sarah and I actually both lead a small group. That's something.
Very exciting.
That's something about us.
So this will be a pleasure to get to rewatch this with you all.
Yeah, what we love. And so, Wednesday night, we are, or Daryl and Alita are hosting a night of going deeper into Ephesians, and the vibe is going to be bring your questions, and then we're going to talk about the questions. And Daryl's going to bring wisdom and do some teaching, and then we're just going to create space for conversation around those things. And it's a good way to say that one of the reasons why we're doing it now is because this talk that I just did this Sunday marks kind of halfway through the series in Ephesians. So it feels like a good time halfway. Bring your questions, thoughts, and let's dive a little bit deeper as we get ready for the second half. So that feels good.
Love it. Awesome. So now we're going to kind of start discussing a little bit. The talking, Jarrett, you mentioned kind of halfway through. Do you want to just kind of brief summary up to this point?
100%.
And of your talk.
Yeah. So we're halfway through, and it's, of course, it's not like the first half is all about this one thing and the second half is all about, it's not like that. But I just talked on Sunday how this verse that I spent most of the time talking about, which is Paul going, I, a prisoner of the Lord, then urge you, live a life worthy of the calling you've received, or walk in a manner worthy of the calling you've received, is really a transitional thought that transitions us from meditating and dwelling on the calling we've received, all that we have in God, who we are as his people, the fact that we've been called by him and we belong to him. And then he's kind of like, all right, so I urge you, live in a way that lines up with the fact that you're children of the living God. And so it's really, it's kind of self-explanatory in one sense, but I spent a talk, just
explaining it more.
Yeah, just passionate about it. And it really is a transitional thought that we need to recognize as a transitional thought into the rest of Ephesians.
Right.
So
I love it. So you talked about kind of this, living in response, and like you mentioned your trip with Daryl and kind of how you changed some of your behaviors in response to kind of this honor of going on the trip. And do you want to talk a little bit about that and unpack that a little bit more?
Right. Yeah. So I talked about how the call. The call that I received in this, I'm just making sure I say it right here, but the call that I received to go on this trip with Daryl meant to fit the setting and to fit the call, there's some things I changed, and they were pretty trivial. I talked about started ironing my shirts and whatever. And
it's big though for him. It really is.
Big for me.
You don't know.
Sarah knows, she's my sister. So, I tried to make it a parallel with this idea that, as Ephesians calls us to change our lives and throw aside certain behaviors and stop doing things and not live how we used to. I was saying and those things should be natural and make sense and be even a joy, not a burden, in light of the calling. If we know the calling we've received, all that's coming up won't feel like rules.
Right.
It'll feel like, yes, of course, I'm going to live it. But there's a challenge that I know we want to talk about, is that one of the things I didn't unpack a ton is that there's a cultural message, and it's a message that I think about lots, is this idea that we need to be true to ourselves, and anything that that suggests we change ourselves is oppressive. And so that's a tension that we probably will continue to feel in this series. What are your thoughts on that and making sense of this changing in light of our calling, but we live in a world that says, hey, just don't, keep your unironed shirts in order to be yourself.
Yeah, no, I think that's so true. And I think there's kind of this push of like, oh, like the only change will come out of myself. Like if I want to change, I'm changing for me and not for someone else. And I think one thing that when we look at like things that like the call of God would have us change in our lives, one thing that we need to recognize first and foremost is that this is not just some random external kind of pressure to change. This is like being called forth into something from the person who created us. And so while it may feel like, oh, it's not our natural, like it's not my habit right now, or it's not my like the way I do things right now, it's not actually something that's like outside of who I'm meant to be because I've been created in this way. I don't know, that's just how I think of it. Anyways,
right,
but,
and so the starting point is so important. It comes down to questions that are like, well, do we believe God made us and wants good for us and has good for us? So often these kind of more narrow, acute cultural tension to conversations, to get anywhere in them, we have to back up and go, well, what's the big worldview? And one thing I tried to allude to at least was just this idea that like the changes in light of the setting weren't they didn't oppress my personhood. They were like, it's actually good for me. Like I was like, it's probably a good thing. And I was being a bit like fun, but it was meant to speak to this reality that anything God asks us to change isn't bad for us.
Right.
And that's there's different layers of that being a difficult thing to understand and embrace. But that was, that's the heart, is that, if we really believe God is who he says he is, then anything he asks us to throw aside or change or give up, or we have to know, not only shouldn't this not be an ultimate burden because of how much I've been given, but also it's good for me. Yeah. It's good for me objectively. And I like the iron shirt thing because everyone listening goes like, yeah, of course that's good for you. You look, sloppy. But then, God and would go like, of course it's good for you. Yeah. And so, but do you have any more thoughts on that or reflections? I think I'm just reminded, I think it's a Jason Upton song where he says, he drops the line, "This is no sacrifice, here's my life." Yes. And it's just, he's singing about God and he's singing about what he's done. And then it's just like, this, actually what you've asked of me is no sacrifice. Here it is. Like, this is gladly. And I think it's such a good shift in perspective of where we feel like everything we're giving up for God sometimes, and there is real sacrifice in it, and we've talked a lot about that, but I think there is that kind of like, oh, it's an easy decision at the end of the day. Oh, it's so crazy that you bring that up. I'm not making this up. We did not talk about this before, but I actually, and Jason Ballard can attest to this, I was listening to that song. Ben Woodman was playing on the piano the other day. I heard him, and as I was thinking about this talk, I was actually meditating on that song, that idea that like, it's like, it really, what am I doing that's actually like, wow, look all I gave up in light of all that God's given up. It's almost like we can't even compare. Now, I know there's real pain and suffering in giving certain things up, but I do love but if you see God this big and this beautiful, it really does make anything look trivial. So that's a cool thing to hash out, though, maybe in small group. What else should we talk about? One thing I was thinking about, you mentioned, I think it's the phrase you use is like, it's not like a tryout. And I think especially if you've grown up within Christian culture or even just like religious ideas of like, needing to earn it. And even though I think we so often hear, like we don't earn it, it's nothing we could do. Like we talk about grace a lot. There is this pervading like sense that it's like, but I've got to do these. Like, how do you think we can approach that kind of, cultural, like Christian cultural mindset? It's just so great. I just feel like I heard that sermon in youth group every week for like a lot of years. It's the thing that we've tried to tackle so much in church is this getting rid of this idea of religiosity. And it's probably because it's the worldview of other religions, or it's just there's something in us that just feels like we need to prove ourselves, or we're never enough, or we're just like, and so, it is, I would just say, it is the gospel to get the attention off of us and to recognize not because of anything in me, but the goodness and the beauty of God, that I'm enough, and he wants me, and I get to sit. I love that. Well, I think about, is it Mephibosheth in the Old Testament? I didn't go there.
You're putting a lot of pressure on yourself right now.
I know I am, but I didn't do it in the talk. But there's that picture of, someone being seated at the king's table,
right?
And who couldn't get there. This cripple, but also sociologically couldn't get there, and he's seated in this place of high honor, and it's kind of a picture of what God has done with all of us. He's like us cripples, and Leland has a song about it.
Right.
And
but he doesn't mention Mephibosheth by name, and so we're
carried to the table, seated where I don't belong, and that's that's the gospel.
Yeah.
We couldn't have crawled up, we couldn't have gotten there, and then we were seated there. And so I love that idea of the imagery of family helps me a lot.
Yeah.
Like Sarah, like there's we have this family. Is perfect. We didn't plan this either, but we have the same parents. Family. And there's nothing we could do that would ever make them go, they're not my kids. We agree with that. They are the most amazing parents. They've been so patient with all these things. We're part of the family. Yeah. But there's things we can do to live in light of the family that we have. I think that helps me. I try to allude to that a couple times too.
Well, and I think there's still even as we've moved out, there's still so many things that we do that are behavioral because of the way that we were raised, right? And our family and values that they held. And it's just a natural response of being in that environment and being welcomed and safe in that space. I don't know. It's interesting.
And there's so much to be said about that. But I think that, the family example though, regardless of the kind of family you had, does help us understand and so this environment or this reality led me to be confident or to be afraid or whatever it would be. But the idea is we're part of the family of God, seated at the table, all access. How should that affect our lives? And so, that's really cool. Okay. Well, this has been fun. We've had a lot of conversations in our lives. I don't know if we've ever had one like this in front of the camera.
This is unique.
We hope that you have an amazing time discussing things. And for both of us, we would say in our small groups, these times of hashing through things together, talking practically, opening up in community has just been the best part of the church. And so we trust and pray that you have an amazing time talking and praying for each other tonight. See you soon.